After igniting a firestorm of controversy, Politico reporter Heidi Przybyla has apologized for admonishing Christians who believe in God-given rights, having claimed that such a worldview is tantamount to, quote, Christian nationalism. Well, good evening. We have a good old case of Christian nationalism. Via Heidi Przybyla, I think, Przybyla, I don't know, apologizes for her comments about Christian nationalism. After igniting a firestorm of controversy, Politico reporter Heidi Przybyla has apologized for admonishing Christians who believe in God-given rights, having claimed that such a worldview is tantamount to, quote, Christian nationalism. In a piece in Politico on Thursday, Przybyla addressed comments she made during an appearance on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes, which is a terrible program. She asserted, that's my opinion, obviously. She asserted on the cable news program that Christian nationalists, quote, believe that our rights as Americans, as human beings, let me try to read this again the way I want to read it. Quote, believe that our rights as Americans, nay, as human beings, don't come from any earthly authority, end quote. Przybyla, Heidi, added that based on this line of thinking, rights, quote, don't come from Congress, they don't come from the Supreme Court, they come from God, end quote. I agree with that. She further asserted that the, quote, problem with that is that they are determining, man, men, and it is men, are determining what God is telling them, end quote. Oh, we could go so hard on this right now, but I'll wait. She also identified the concept of natural law as a, quote, pillar of Catholicism, which I find interesting because nowadays they're kind of different, right? I mean, they've always been different, but I mean, like the public perspective of Catholicism versus Christianity, like Catholics are Christian, but Christians aren't necessarily Catholic. Fundamental same truths, fundamental theological views, kind of, for the most part. All of the essentials are there, I guess I would say, but like in the public eye, and specifically in the Christian perspective, in the Christian sphere of reality, we don't see Catholics and Christians as the same. So to use them interchangeably is probably not a great idea. Continuing, and suggests that while, quote, it's been used for good and social justice campaigns, such as the push for racial equality and civil rights, there is an extremist element of conservative Christians who say that this applies specifically to issues including abortion and gay marriage, end quote. She lamented that, quote, it's going much further than that. As you can see, for instance, with the ruling in Alabama this week that judges connected to that dominionist faction did, end quote. The Alabama Supreme Court decision mentioned by Przybyla, Heidi, ruled that embryos created through in vitro fertilization are human beings protected by state law. Responding to the backlash over her comments on Christian nationalism, Przybyla insisted, quote, due to some clumsy words, I was interpreted by some people as making arguments that are quite different from what I believe. Reporters have a responsibility to use words and convey meaning with precision, and I am sorry I fell short of this in my appearance. I love this because it's such a beautiful example of somebody refusing to take responsibility, but trying to word it in such a way that it seems as though you are to the reader who's not actually paying attention. Due to some clumsy words, I was interpreted. That means your words actually weren't the problem. See, if your words weren't the problem, then interpretation doesn't matter. If your words are, as she says, convey meaning with precision, then there is no room for gray area interpretation. So it's just such a beautiful example of somebody refusing to take responsibility for their actions, their behavior, their words in this case, and blaming the reader for it, blaming the interpretation of the audience, and just doing a very good job of making it sound like they're apologizing when really they're not. I'm sorry I fell short of this in my appearance, meaning I appeared to the audience to have fallen short, but I don't actually feel like I fell short. Just the arrogance. Cool. Among the passages that caused confusion was my attempt to draw a distinction between Christians and the small set of these people who advocate Christian nationalism, which is such a wildly low number of Christians who even know what Christian nationalism is. And yet this is becoming popular. It's becoming popular to have this rhetoric of Christians being synonymous with this concept, this mostly like very political concept of Christian nationalism. It's like, no, the majority of Christians have no idea what you're even talking about. They have no idea what you're talking about. After reiterating the comments she made on air, she concluded that they did not amount to, quote, a good definition of Christian nationalism, end quote. Przybyla specifically addressed the main criticisms of her remarks by stressing that, quote, many people have views about our rights as Americans that would coincide with those of many of our nation's founders, which are predominantly Christian views. It just is what it is. She noted the proclamation in the Declaration of Independence that all people are, quote, are endowed by their creator, i.e. God, with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, end quote. Przybyla's comments about Christian nationalism on MSNBC invited a host of criticism, including the Bishop Robert Barron of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Winona, Rochester, and Minnesota. In a video posted on X last week, he condemned her remarks as, quote, one of the most disturbing and frankly dangerous things that I've seen in a political conversation, end quote. A bit dramatic, but I get where he's coming from. Quote, it is exceptionally dangerous when we forget the principle that our rights come from God and not from a government, he said. Because the basic problem is, if they come from the government or Congress or the Supreme Court, they can be taken away by those same people. This is opening the door to totalitarianism. Having a hard time tonight, my friends. This is the truth. This is the truth. This is exactly what I would say. This is exactly how I feel about it. That is the problem with that whole concept of rights being given to you by your government. What that means, one, is that rights are not universal. In a sense, we have governmental rights that coincide with laws and things like that. But we also have what we call in society human rights, which most people believe extend to all humans across the entire planet. If that's the case, they have to come from God. You can't say that we have human rights when you go to different cultures, different demographics, and you see that they don't abide by our laws. They don't believe in the same rights that America believes in. They have totally different views governmentally on what rights are and what rights people should have. We would say, though, that even in those cases, you have certain rights that are unalienable as a human being. Okay, well then justify, where do they come from? Because it's not the US government. That doesn't make any sense. It's illogical, it's irrational, and it's kind of childish. If we have human rights that are actually just baseline human rights that every human on the planet has, they have to come from something objective. They cannot be subjective. Governments are subjective. Laws are subjective. The legal system is subjective. All of it is subjective. It has to come from something objective. Przybyla's comments about Christian nationalism come as the term has attained increased prevalence in American politics. Yes, because it's being used as a weapon to demonize religious people. Just a week before Przybyla's remarks on MSNBC generated outrage, prominent American movie director Rob Reiner's documentary titled God and Country, that defines Christian nationalism as the idea that America was founded as a so-called Christian nation and that our laws should be based on the Bible, hit theaters. Quote, God and Country, the movie or documentary, claims that the ideology of Christian nationalism, quote, distorts not only the constitutional republic, but Christianity itself. That's wild. What a ridiculous statement. In 2022 interview with the Christian Post executive editor, Dr. Richard Land, suggested that the increased use of the term amounts to a, quote, tactic by the left and their toadies in the media to suppress patriotic beliefs and to suppress the idea that America is a unique country. Land told Christian Post that pejoratively, they want to tie Christian nationalism to racism and to prejudice, and I reject those labels. He maintained that based on the thinking of the left and the media, if you believe in any sense that America has a unique role to play in the world and that God in his providence has had something to do with the United States, then you're a Christian nationalist. Interesting deal. You have to admit that just as humans, regardless of where you sit with religion or inside of Christianity or as a Jew or Islam, it doesn't matter. It's if you have any semblance of morality, it's the same type of issue. Morality cannot be subjective based on a government. It just can't. Because then you can't say things like murder are wrong. Okay, why are they wrong? Well, because they're illegal. That makes no sense. You are a child. Not because it's illegal. That's subjective. There could be a country that decides murder is legal. They don't. Why? Well, because most humans who have functioning brains can say like, no, there's just something inherently wrong about murder. Okay, so infinite regression all the way back, you end up to a point where you go, okay, it just is. It just is wrong. It just is immoral. We just know that it is. We just know that it is. Okay, why? Well, from my perspective, because of God. Because there is an objective moral standard that says these things are wrong. These things are inherently wrong. They're immoral. This is the same type of thing. There's no other way to go around it. Governments cannot decide this type of thing because then it is subjective. These things have to be tied to human rights. Human rights are given to humans by an objective being in an objective way, and that is what protects those rights. Otherwise, they're not protected. They can be taken away at any time by any government for any reason, and they will find a reason. I hope that makes sense. Wild stuff, man. It's wild stuff. Love you guys. Have a great week.